That's absolutely fine, thank you. And I know it's a few people may need to leave at or before 4. Hopefully we'll conclude no later than 4.
Yeah. Are we live, Ben?
Yes, we're live on YouTube now.
Thank you. Right, Roger, you can start the meeting. Thank you.
Thank you, Ruth, and good afternoon, everybody attending this meeting and those who may be watching in on the Leeds City Region LEP Board meeting of 24 February. I've got a number of apologies, and I've said, Ruth, if you can just help make sure that I don't miss anybody. Apologies from the private sector. Rashid Palmer will be joining us slightly late. I haven't quite seen Mandy yet, but I assume she's on the call. And we've had apologies from Cooley as well. She's got a conflicting meeting. From our public sector colleagues, Baroness Blake is unable to join us. I think it's a Leeds Budget Day discussion. And similarly, Councillor Jeffrey is not able to join us. Delighted other colleagues are with us. As an observer, Councillor Paul Widdowson from York is attending in the absence of either Keith Ashton or Councillor Coyne. We've not heard from Harrogate. Peter Mucklow, who's our senior Whitehall sponsor, will be joining us slightly late into the meeting. And as a result of the lead position, delighted that Eve Roothouse is going to attend as an observer in the stead of Tom Reardon. Otherwise, I think we are, unless I've missed anybody, have I? Pardon? Oh, Shirley. Oh, yes.
Sent her apologies, and Mandy Ridyard is here, Roger.
Yes, thank you.
Okay.
Apologies to Shirley. In fact, Shirley sent me a note and reminded me there's a couple of the items she's got some comments that she wants me to add in as chair. So I was going to perhaps open by asking the board to join me. I know individually they may have already done so, but to send our congratulations to the new leader of Leeds, which it may well be now confirmed as leader, or if not, might be happening as we speak. But we look forward to welcoming him into our partnership and in playing a full part in that. So I'm sure the board would be happy to join me in expressing our collective congratulations to him on that important position. Agenda item number 2, declarations of interest. Are there anything that anybody wishes to declare in relation to the agenda items that we are not already aware of in general declarations? And if so, please perhaps indicate now and Ruth can collect them. Or if something emerges as we go through the discussion, perhaps you can raise a hand and we'll make sure that we capture them then. So I'll pause momentarily. Okay, I hope you're reviewing all the screens, Ruth. I'm trying to at the same time. I'm not aware, moving to agenda, thank you for that, agenda item 3, that there's any items where we need to exclude the press and the public from. Am I correct, Ruth?
That's right, there's nothing today, Roger.
Okay, thank you. So moving to the minutes of our last meeting, the 1st of 2021 on the 20th of January, I just want to pause and ask if there are any comments or otherwise on those minutes before I perhaps seek, by way of a thumbs up, your approval to them being an accurate record of our debate, discussion, and where appropriate, our decisions. So I'll pause momentarily to see if anybody's got any comments, and if not, I'll then move rapidly to a collection, hopefully, of a few thumbs up on them being the accurate record of that meeting. I'm getting a few thumbs up. I'm getting lots of thumbs up. So we've got thumbs up. Thank you, Ruth. So we're going to move, I think, into economic reporting. I'm assuming Alan is going to lead initially on this, assuming I'm correct, before perhaps I'm sure handing to Patrick and others. So I'll just pause and invite Alan into this agenda item 5.
Thank you, Roger, although I am just going to hand straight to Patrick, if that's all right.
Thank you. Patrick.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, just to pick up on the key points of the economic reporting. So probably worth drawing everybody's attention to the publication of the National GDP Data, which was produced by ONS and published about a week ago. This is the first official confirmation of the nature of the hit that the economy took in 2020. And that first estimate of GDP suggests a contraction of 10% in 2020, which, to put it in context, is the largest single annual contraction in GDP in the last 300 years. Alongside that, it was particularly interesting that the National Institute of Economic and Social Research also released their latest UK quarterly forecast. And in their view of growth in 2021 has been trimmed back as a result of the third lockdown. So prior to the third lockdown, they were assuming a strong bounce back in growth in 2021 nationally of 5.9%. Since then, and the imposition of the third lockdown, and since they've reforecast their view of growth in 2021, they now believe the UK economy will grow by 3.4% in 2021. So that gives you some sense of their view of the impact on growth in 2021. Since the publication of the board report papers, we've also had updated labour market information, principally in the form of new claimant count data, and for the period November to January. And that suggests that for January, the claimant count rates in West Yorkshire nudged up by a further 0.3%. Now, in the context of the labour market performance this year, that's not a particularly significant increase. It's only another 300 people or so added to the claimant count rate. But nationally, the rate dropped by 0.7%. So that's obviously something we're keeping a close eye on. I think more generally, I think it's worth drawing the board's attention to some other trends more generally in terms of what we're getting through from the LEP network and the growth managers in terms of impact of Brexit. More generally, I think what we're seeing is that many businesses are actually reporting an impact in the first couple of weeks as a result of Brexit, particularly with delays in supplies, with many suppliers also suggesting that they're also looking at challenges around increased costs and looking at alternative suppliers in the UK. That insight is backed up by some of the emerging results from the Leeds City Region Business Survey, which we're currently conducting, which suggests that many businesses are facing these problems. More generally, I think that survey is also suggesting that something like 93% of businesses in West Yorkshire have actually used either the furlough scheme, reduced hours, or looked at shorter working across their workforces. More generally, other national data, survey data from the Office for National Statistics and the CBI suggests that we are seeing an increased sort of a propensity for businesses to use the furlough scheme in January as the effects of lockdown 3 have become accelerated, and also some indication from some of those national surveys as well that some of increasing issues around reducing cash reserves. So I think more generally, I think we're seeing a sort of a challenging environment for businesses at the moment. Some indication of business failure is also beginning to increase a little bit, to the extent that Companies House have actually suspended processing of company information for the time being. But more generally, I think we can point to positive notes in the labour market. The labour market situation has remained relatively stable over the last 8 months, and more generally, I think the other thing I think it's probably worth bringing to the board's attention is the activity levels, retail and footfall activity levels in various city centres. And particularly, I think that information is suggesting that activity levels are certainly lower than they were in lockdown 2, and probably at a similar level to what we saw in lockdown 1. By way of example, for instance, in the first 2 weeks of February in Leeds, city centre footfall was at 18% of its corresponding figure in 2019. So obviously, some particular challenges for retailers in particular locations. So hopefully that gives the board an update on the current economic picture. Thank you. Happy to take questions, by the way.
Thank you. Could you, I don't know, you can access the chat question from Amir regarding just clarification of of accommodation and food, as you described it, Patrick. I think his question was, does that mean broadening out into hospitality generally?
Sorry, Roger. Sorry, a bit of an internet sort of connection issue there. Can you repeat that?
Amir asks, what is meant by accommodation and food? Is this hotels, restaurants?
It is indeed.
Do we have any statistics for the BAME makeup of this sector?
We don't. Not with those. Not with the statistics that are produced from UK GDP. But we could do some work in that area and could look at that. But yeah, it is essentially hotels and catering and those sectors.
Thank you. And just for colleagues, whilst perhaps others are thinking as to whether they want to ask any further questions, 2 points. Just whilst the 10% reduction is obviously significant, I'm also reminded of the scenarios that the Bank of England ran in the summer that suggested something significantly greater, which itself would have been off the end of a cliff. And secondly, and I think importantly, to some of the other work that the board are aware of when we're looking at the impact of the local growth fund and the West Yorkshire Plus transport investments over the last 6 months of coming close to the end of that investment period. One of the things I've asked is that we perhaps look at the benefit to the economy, albeit we've got an overall 10%, hopefully short-term reduction of our investments. In other words, what would have been the counterfactual if we hadn't made any or all of those on that impact? Because I think that would be quite useful to know, because whilst we talk about the outcomes of that investment, but actually what it's also done by way of adding a degree of resilience to the economy of the city region. Ed, did you want to come in? You're on mute, Ben, still.
Chair, no, it's fine. You raised the point I was going to make, so I'll come back later.
Okay. Anybody else want to raise any points on this? Because this is a paper for us to note, which we do, and it's, as always, Patrick, great to have all the detail. It's really helpful. Anybody want to raise any specific questions? Did you want to come back in, Ben?
Yeah, Chair, I will. Just to make a point about page, we've provided a lot of information about kind of virus prevalence and impacts in the slides, and just on slide 22, which looks at rates across the country in a slightly complicated but hopefully very helpful form. You'll see that we've highlighted West Yorkshire in terms of the rates against other places in the UK, and that graph shows in the version that's with you, because it was when the papers were published, has got the West Yorkshire areas to the right hand side of that graph. What we've seen over the last week is that because of what appears to be kind of the levels of positivity rates in areas remaining fairly high in West Yorkshire, we've moved towards the left hand side of that graph. Mm-hmm. And what that seems to strongly correlate to are areas of deprivation. So I guess I'm trying to tee up for the conversation later on, particularly around inclusive growth, that we're seeing that the impacts of coronavirus and the impacts of deprivation are quite closely correlated, and I think that's going to be quite important for us going forwards.
Yeah, well put, because as I've said many times, and I know that it's part of our common purpose as a board of private and public sector in partnership, is that the prize is how we eliminate, not just attend to, deprivation and poverty on a sustained basis. But so thank you for that, Ben. Before I move on, are there anything else anybody wish to raise? If not, can we note this report? And as always, with thanks to Patrick and his team for their sterling work on this. Okay, thank you. So we'll move now to agenda item 6, which I presume is going to be you, Brian, in terms of economic recovery and response, albeit we're going to do a specific in agenda item 8 around our entrepreneurship proposition and where we want to take that next. So I guess over to you, Brian.
Okay, thank you, Chairman. I'll keep it short because obviously we've got some more substantive items later on in the agenda, but I just wanted to pull out some of the things that are really positive going forward and some of the more recent data. I think the vaccine rollout has been absolutely incredible, the numbers of people that have been vaccinated. Now, Patrick mentioned business liquidations, but to counter that, we're also seeing a lot more new business bank accounts being opened. So the new firm formation rate's increasing, so we're starting to see an increase in the business stock. We've also seen a 13% increase in job vacancies, which again is good news. And again, if you look at the Bank of England forecasts and some of the scenarios that were alluded to earlier, we're actually in a better position than perhaps we might have been. Also, the unemployment figures relatively flat at the moment, which again I think is a really positive sign. At the peak of the pandemic, we'd got something like 340,000 people on furlough, and now that's dropped significantly. The grant support that's been dispersed to businesses across the region again has been phenomenal, and I think some of the work that the local authorities done in distributing area restrictions grants and the COVID recovery grants is phenomenal. Over 60,000 businesses have received grants totaling more than 145 million. So incredible effort across the partnership, across West Yorkshire, to get money out there to businesses that need it most. There is an expectation in the budget next week that there'll be further announcements on additional business support. There's a lot of expectation around extending the furlough scheme, lengthening VAT deferrals, as well as continuing to support the conversion of the bounce back loans into pay-as-you-grow loans, which again will help to alleviate some of the cash flow challenges. I think the other positive thing I'd like to say is we obviously pre-COVID, there was a lot of anxiety and concern about the economic impacts of Brexit. And it is true, there's been some challenges, but also we've seen some new opportunities open up for our businesses. And also I think the speed with which we mobilised our partners and suppliers to deliver that Brexit support, obviously in the middle of a pandemic, has been really exceptional. So a lot of support there, and obviously we will be looking to secure additional resources to continue that support going forward, some of which is identified in the paper. On the skills side, obviously the additional resource that we put into the Employment Hub and the Reboot digital skills programme is making a huge difference. And again, we're starting to see increased numbers coming through that route to support people as they come off furlough. So I think there are a lot of positive signs, a lot of green shoots, and I think the collective effort of the wider partnership, chambers, the local authorities and all our wider stakeholders has made a real difference in mitigating the impact of the pandemic on the economy. I'll stop at that because I'm aware we've got some substantive items to cover further down the agenda, but happy to take questions.
Thank you, Brian. But before we do take questions, even though the Economic Recovery Board is meeting tomorrow, I wondered whether Susan Hinchcliffe wanted, as chair of that board, wanted to add any comments. There's no necessity, Susan, but I just wondered whether you might want to, particularly as we are considering a proposition around culture and the creative arts, not necessarily to have a discussion now, but just to perhaps signpost it to board colleagues. I'll happily do it if you prefer.
Obviously, we're all, thanks to all the staff in the Combined Authority and also our own local authorities who've distributed all that money. Some of it's been like 7 days a week, working over Easter and bank holidays, etc., to get it out. We're all anticipating, of course, what's going to happen next with the budgets, and I'm sure we've all made calls for more business funding through that budget, but we'll have to wait and see what transpires through that. We are, as you say, Chair, pitching for economic recovery money to support our West Yorkshire Economic Recovery Plan. We've not yet got that fully funded by national governments. I'm not sure they're yet in the space to think about how the recovery is going to happen and how they're going to fund that and through what mechanisms, but we certainly know what we need to do in the districts and in the region and are ready to deliver with our own resources, but also augment that with government resources as and when it becomes available. So I'll just leave it at that really, Chair. Thank you.
That's really helpful. And I think one of the things we will probably consider, but not necessarily today, is it's fine having the funding, the propositions and the support as well as the physical infrastructure. There's probably an overwhelming challenge as to how we perhaps think about the education attainment gap and how over several years that might be addressed. And I don't want to necessarily get into that discussion, but we need to look at the scale of the challenges compared to perhaps the resources that might need to be applied, and there may be some choices that we have to make. But anyway, let's perhaps that for a later board. Are there any other comments or questions anybody wants to raise on this paper before I pose recommendations? I'm just quickly scanning if anybody wants to raise anything. Ruth, just make sure I don't miss anybody.
Helen, Chair.
Helen would like to, Helen, please come in, and perhaps Ruth can scan others. I don't want to miss anybody. Helen.
Yeah, I just wanted to comment to really welcome the inclusion of culture and creative arts as a strand. I know that obviously links back to some of the figures shown in the previous paper by that sector falling by 25%. So it's much needed, and I know a lot of officers within the West Yorkshire Combined Authority have been working on a paper that I think they've presented on that. So there's been a lot of work gone into it. So just to acknowledge that and to welcome that inclusion.
Thank you, Helen. Cameron, do you want to actually pose your question? Would you prefer me to read it out? I'm
happy either way.
Hear from you rather than me do it for you.
No, I'll do it. Thank you, Roger. So I just wanted to ask if we've got a better understanding. I know the Bank of England, I think, was indicating a V-shaped recovery for the economy. Do we know, is it a V, is it a W, is it an L? And how does the regional recovery look like against the national recovery? How do we fare compared to other regions?
Fine. I'll help you by saying the last time I considered it, which may not be as up to date, was the notion that the so-called, described in economic terms as a K-shaped recovery. In other words, different parts of the economy, and back to Helen's point, different parts of the economy will recover at different rates. And I guess the 4 steps that we're all probably trying to process between now and hopefully normality on the 22nd of June onwards will perhaps begin to shape that up. But I'm giving a bit of airtime for Brian to perhaps have a more answer to your very good question, Cameron.
Yeah, I think it's a great question, and the honest answer is I think it's probably too early to determine, and different areas will have different rates of recovery based on the industrial structure and the extent to which they've been affected by the pandemic. It's probably something that we could get a research team to look at in terms of comparable benchmarks, and then perhaps bring it back to a future meeting. But really good question. Sorry, Roger, Chairman.
Oh, no, you finished. Sorry, it was my interjected.
Yeah, my instinct on that is that it's too early to determine the shape of the recovery. I think we'd have a better idea in probably 6 to 12 months' time.
If I could share a thought, Roger.
Please do so.
Just thinking out aloud, like, as a region, when we're thinking about recovery, do we focus on where our strengths are and what we're good at and where we've got an asset base and build on that? Or do we use this as an opportunity to think about what do we need in a post-pandemic world for a digital, technological era? What are the skills we don't have, and we focus on that? So do we go for a strengths-based approach and go with where the asset, or do we focus on filling the gaps and looking at where the voids are? And I think it's an interesting thought, because there's a case for either one, isn't there?
Well, I think the best case is to build on both.
Yeah.
And if you remember the 3 stages of our recovery, in the 3 R's, and not the usual 3 R's that we're all used to, of rescue what we've got left, but also begin to reimagine an economy of tomorrow, as well as a consequence, put in resilience to this and similar sorts of potential shocks. And hence there are now 5, or will be after tomorrow's meeting, 5 propositions, of which we're going to discuss one big one, entrepreneurship, a bit later on in this agenda, about building on the strengths but not being limited by those, but how do we expand out into those wider areas. As Susan has said, all of these things are possible so long as 3 things happen. We have a plan, well, we do have a plan, and it's been iterated and it's been widely debated and discussed, and it's been calibrated in terms of this is what we offer economically, a 5 times return for every taxpayer pound put in, albeit a 1.6 billion, or will be after tomorrow, ask. And importantly, how do we move the dial on so long as we have the plan, can we have the powers and the investment pounds over a period of time? And finally, particularly as now a mayoral combined authority, that we have we're allowed to get on with it and not necessarily be managed from the centre, and continue to be trusted to deploy public money in the excellent way we have to date. But then I would say that, wouldn't I? I think Mandy wanted to come in, and then Alan Rees wanted to come in. Mandy.
Thanks, Roger. One of the things that, if you read any papers that are predicting our future in the next 20 years, is that these black swan events might happen more frequently, not necessarily pandemics. I think there's a 50-50 chance being predicted of a financial crash in the next 5 years. So is it worth considering what we're doing for our region in terms of resilience going forward, and business resilience especially? It's not just about being agile, it's about having a strategy to help businesses change their way of working, strategize against future black swan events, and become more stable for when the next tsunami hits us.
Indeed, and I'll answer that before perhaps Brian might want to come in terms of actually developing the size and shape of our economic shock absorbers as part of that, and there's work ongoing on that. But before bringing Brian back in, Alan, did you want to come in, and then I'll go to Kate? Alan.
Thanks, Chair. It was to Cameron's point really, which is about investing in our strengths and versus investing in the gaps, and we need to do both. And the paper, I just wanted to draw attention to some points towards the end of the paper, which is seeking the LEP board's broad endorsement for the key priority areas for investment. So as Councillor Hinchcliffe said, the government has not provided additional funding for economic recovery per se beyond the substantial money that is put into business grants and so on. So we're in the position where we need to decide how to distribute our funding locally. Funding has already been put into skills and employment and into local economic recovery plans. The question is then what next? There's a substantial discussion item in a minute, which you mentioned, about entrepreneurship, which we'll come to. There are 2 other broad areas that we're proposing we prioritise, both of which are 2 of the key propositions in the economic recovery plan. There's one around investment in a low carbon pipeline. So in order to hit net zero carbon by 2038 and take the economic opportunity that comes from the shift to a zero carbon agenda, there is a real need for us to invest in developing a substantial pipeline of schemes across buildings and industry and transport and energy and so on. And we think that that should be a key priority for the region going forward. The second proposal that's in there, which is about building on the key asset in the region, but also highly relevant to the pandemic that we're coming out of, which is around health tech and health innovation. And we think there is we have some great strengths in the city region on that, but there is more that we could do in order to support the ecosystem and to support the extent to which innovation is then deployed into the NHS. So the proposals at the moment are in this paper are at a relatively high level. There's more detail in the propositions that we have submitted to government, but I'm just keen to draw to the board's attention that those proposals are in there and to seek the board's endorsement. Thank you.
Thank you, Alan. Now, just perhaps the Secretariat could note that following tomorrow's Economic Recovery Board meeting, it may be that we should circulate to private sector members the latest iteration of that economic recovery strategy, so they're as informed as some of us are that are on that board. Kate.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I guess Alan has covered a little bit of this, but I guess my point was simpler. It was from the Economic Recovery Board point of view. There are two goals. One is around net carbon zero and environmental focus, and the other is around inclusion and inclusive growth. And those two goals are both new. So you're right, Cameron, we've got to focus on our assets and the things where we're strong, but actually we've really got to focus on those two areas, which are, you know, I think we have a lot of strengths in both of those areas, but whether or not we can argue that they are an absolute strength for us at the moment, I think is perhaps moot. And I don't want us to lose that attention. Thank you.
Thank you, Kate. I mean, you make a point, and Simon may come in and just make sure I get this right, but we shouldn't forget, this is not in a complacent way, but actually in a confident way, that independently the Municipal Journal awarded the Combined Authority and the LEP the leadership award when it comes to tackling the climate challenges. So I say no grounds for complacency, but at least perhaps others think that our thinking is at least at the front end of the queue rather than otherwise. But Simon might just correct me or add to it. But Simon, over to you.
Well, I wasn't going to refer directly to that, but now you've given me the invitation. But no, I think, I echo Kate's point. You know, we are focusing on those two areas. I think it is important that we recognise them as new. We have been recognised quite rightly for a huge amount of work that officers and others have done, both, you know, on a project basis and beyond. But I think we recognise we're at the start of a very long and urgent journey, and we have urgency and agency available to us, but it's a relative strength rather than an absolute one. But the point I was really coming in to make was to really comment, I think, on the resilience piece as well that Mandy made mention to. And it would be so tempting and easy to try and design out the crisis we've just had, rather than actually building in flexibility in terms of community and social environment infrastructure and so on, to be more adaptive to things that may come as well. So this is me endorsing it and supporting it, but not being complacent about what we've done and recognising we've got a lot of work ahead of us.
Yes, thank you, Simon. Brian, did you want to come in and perhaps reference the recommendations, and we'll seek the board's?
Yeah, I mean, just briefly, if I may, Chair, you know, on the Black Swan events and supporting businesses and the economy to be more resilient, I think there are two things that we can do to address that. The first one is working at a micro level with the businesses to support them with shock event planning, and that's really about transferring skills and improving the flexibility and leadership capability within some of the businesses to deal with those shock events. And I think the other thing that we can do as part of our economic recovery strategies, not have all our eggs in one basket. So we're spreading the risk across a range of different sectors where we believe the growth is going to come. I mean, you know, history teaches us one thing, that, you know, if you have an economy that's over reliant on one industry, be it, you know, steel or coal or automotive, you know, you've got a much greater risk. So it's far better to spread the risk across, you know, a range of sectors with focus on those areas where we believe, you know, we've got the growth potential, whether that's creative, environmental, or health tech type businesses.
Thank you, Brian. Thank you. You reflect, you know, when you think of the city region's economy, you know, it's a micro of the whole UK, and that's ingrained in our history. I seem to remember not necessarily making the case for Leeds as a city, but in Victorian England, it was described as the city of 1,000 trades. Well, you know, that's true of all of our great cities and towns that make up the region. So I just want to direct colleagues' attention to the recommendations on page 53, paragraph 9, and just seek, by way of a series of thumbs up, if I can, that you're happy to endorse those recommendations as a board. We are. Thank you. And yes, Kate, absolutely right. The prize is that inclusive growth, or put the other way around, the abolition of all that which we don't like about poverty, deprivation, etc. Before we move to agenda item 7, welcome to Peter Mucklow, who's joined us, our senior Whitehall sponsor. Great to have you here, Peter, and thank you for giving up your time. So I know how busy you are. So we'll move into agenda item 7, and again, we'll probably go through relatively quickly these items, although I would like to spend a bit of time on the capital programme as we're coming to the end of the 6-year journey of the Local Growth Fund. But firstly, over to you, Tim Swift.
Thank you, Chair. So just a couple of points very quickly to highlight, and part of this is the connection between 2.2 and 2.4 in the report. We had a useful presentation on sort of partnership work that's developing between the various social housing providers, what people of my age will still call housing associations. And there's real value in working with that at a regional level, because different associations historically have tended to work in different areas, and actually they have different skills and abilities. So it's important we recognise that and maximise their use. And that particularly ties in with the housing pipeline that's referred to in 2.4, which are the sites where they're clearly not going to be developed without some public funding to ability gaps. And again, social housing providers can be useful partners in delivering that. It's very good news that we got an allocation of the Brownfield Housing Fund money as part alongside the devolution settlement. It's challenging though, because the criteria for housing schemes do still tend to benefit fairly narrow definitions of affordability. And there is also a relatively tight time scale. And that may mean that some of the sites that we would see as the highest priority in terms of inclusive growth and their long-term benefits are hard to deliver within that framework. The other point I want to just touch on briefly is the enterprise zones and the decision that was taken there about prioritising of financing. Again, clearly because of the growth deal coming to an end, we need to make sure that we push ahead with the sites that can be delivered quickly. But it's also important to emphasise that doesn't in any way undermine the commitment of both the combined authority and the individual partner councils to delivering on all of the enterprise zones within phase 2. It's about recognising that we're going to need to look at new funding streams as they come forward to take forward some of the larger and more complex projects there. So thank you, Chair.
Yeah, thank you, Tim. Just to re-emphasise the point about those phase 2 sites, some of them have been pretty difficult sites for many decades, not just weeks and months, and present all sorts of challenges of securing ownership and value for the taxpayer. And but it's good to have that confirmation that we will build them all out in time, subject to availability of resources. Anybody else want to come in and ask any questions or any comments on the paper that Tim's put forward? Ben, do you want to come in?
Thank you, Chair. Just to build on Councillor Swift's points, really, that there is a kind of implicit challenge within the Brownfield Housing Fund as to how we maximise that fund against inclusive growth and carbon objectives, while still hitting the criteria of the fund and meeting the very demanding unit target that's been set in that. And we're looking to bring some quite rapid advice back that kind of sets out the principles that we think is best to apply.
Yeah, and I think, again, for me, and perhaps for a later conversation, a later board, just understanding what the shape of the proposal, what the projects are and the proposal, and what the time frame for delivery would be, I'm sure would be of interest to board colleagues in terms of the wider. Just as we know from the Local Growth Fund, the housing output objective is quite a challenge, not because we're not up to the task, it's a difficult thing to do, nonetheless. Without anybody wishing to raise anything else, can I ask colleagues just to note this report, and we'll move swiftly on to item 7B, Melanie, the update on the programme as we get almost into the last month of what seemed like only yesterday the beginning of a journey that has seen us deploy in excess of £500 million plus the transport fund of public money across a wide range of schemes and sectors. Melanie.
Yes, Chair, thank you. So as you say, we have the growth deal coming to an end at the end of March. We have actual Q2 spend figures in here. We're currently processing the claims for Q3, which will be reported formally next week. But what I can say is it looks as if the spend is going to be around 48% of this year's target, which is exactly where we've been the last couple of years. So it's there's still some risk attached to that, but we're on track to spend the full allocation. And indeed, on the economic development projects that are part of the programme, we are still anticipating an overspend in that area. We have over-programmed, we have over-committed against the schemes, and it does mean that we will be able to achieve a full spend and maximise the outputs that can be delivered. We've got 57 schemes that are in the economic development part of the programme, and we're working to close those down formally with financial closures. 15 of those have been closed down. The rest of them will need to come through by the end of June. We can then report on outputs until 2024. So we still have time to report on the outputs, but we'll formally close the finances down on the projects. We've also had the annual performance review with government, where obviously they wanted to focus on our performance on growth deal and also looking at ramping up for our Getting Building Fund. The meeting was very positive. The feedback has been good. We haven't had a formal response, but we're expecting to have confirmation that we've met the requirements in all the areas, which is how they're going to score that. You either meet the requirements or there's action needed for you to be able to get back on track. So we're expecting to meet that. On the transport fund side of the growth deal, we will be slightly underspent against this year's target, but because the programme runs on for a number of years, we have contractual commitments into next year that will mean that we have full commitment and full allocation of that funding. Just going back to the Getting Building Fund, if you recall, this is the new programme that asked for shovel-ready schemes, and we have 15 projects within that programme. And by the end of next month, we expect 13 of those to have full approvals. So they will be starting on site or will be about to start on site very soon. And that means that there's approximately 48 of the 56 million, I think, actually allocated. And Councillor Swift mentioned about enterprise zones and commercial sites. We have a couple of our enterprise zones that have secured funding through the Getting Building Fund. But one of the things that we expect to see come forward in the next financial year is our new commercial pipeline that identifies funding opportunities to complete the EZ programme and also look at other commercial sites. I'm happy to take any questions if members have any questions.
Perhaps you might just, or maybe I'll do it, Melanie, about the fact that, just to remind what I said earlier about the impact assessment and part
Yes.
of the lessons learned and things we've done well, things we could have done better, things we've learned from, etc. And to hopefully give some evidence-based support for the, and I know people get a bit fed up with me with my 1 + 4 = 10, but that 1 + 4 = 10 has some basis of truth in it rather than just a catchphrase. But anyway, anybody want to raise any questions on this before I do two things? I'll tell you what they are in a moment. Anybody want to raise any questions? Okay, so the two things are, first of all, can I just ask the board to note the update, but can I also ask the board to join me to give our thanks to officers present and beyond through you, Melanie, for all of the sterling work you've done from a standing start and some of the twists and turns of a cash flow profile that was imposed upon us that we would have never wanted, and also to you, Angela, just to convey this board's grateful thanks for all that's been done, and testimony to the range of things. It's in Appendix 1 to this paper sets out the range of activities we've involved ourselves with over the last 6 years. So thank you to that. So we'll move on now to that first of the three substantive points that we wanted to cover today around the entrepreneurship proposition. And I just wanted to make sure that the board's attention is directed to the questions in paragraph 2.6, because we want to get your input, your thoughts. This is a shaping conversation, so this isn't just about saying, yeah, that's fine. Actually, we want constructive challenge. Have we missed things, different, etc. So I'll hand, I think, to Brian. Am I handing to Brian again, or is it Alan? I'm not quite sure which of you, and I hope I haven't stolen any of your thunder by the remarks I've already made. But Alan,
it's actually Andrew. But I'll say very briefly. I think you've introduced it initially, Roger. What we're seeking here is an open discussion about the proposals to help shape them. So the board's previously considered the entrepreneur proposal, which was as part of the economic recovery plan, but we're now, as I said earlier, we're in a position where we're looking to consider what programs we can actually implement using local funding. We have done an outline of 3 programs that are in the paper in headline terms, but we're really interested in the board's views for shaping them. And there's been a workshop which I'm sure Andrew will refer to because he chaired it. So I'll hand over to Andrew if that's all right. Thank you.
Apologies, Andrew. I should have realised that. Completely slipped my mind. But without further ado, over to you.
Don't worry, that's fine. Yes, good. We'll get to innovation, and I just wanted to spend 2 minutes though on talking about growth, because since we haven't had an innovation and growth panel since the last LEP, there isn't a report on that. But the engine room of the growth part of what we do in the innovation growth panel has been particularly active, as you'd expect during COVID times as well. So I thought I'd just touch a few headlines so people feel what the engine room is doing as well as the innovation stuff. 7,000 plus inquiries to the growth service over the last 9 months, some of which have been referring clients to the business support service, particularly returning clients to the West Yorkshire Council support and helping to deliver that £500 million worth of support to the 60,000 plus businesses. So a huge amount of work having gone in there. 1,000 small firms have been supported with 2.2 million of funding from the Growth Deal and ERDF in grants. 400 firms have benefited from £1 million worth of funding under the Digital Resilience Voucher Scheme. 50 SMEs have been organised into action learning groups doing peer-to-peer support, and on. So really a lot of good work having been done. There's a few new things coming up in that area as well that I'd just like to highlight so that people are aware of them. There was an announcement, I think this week, about Made Smarter, which is a board that we set up in our region over a year ago in anticipation of some money becoming available to support Industry 4.0, automation, digitalisation, big data, those kind of things in our manufacturing businesses in the region. £8 million has been allocated nationally. We're being asked to spend that as Yorkshire, which is interesting. So that's South Yorkshire, North and East Yorkshire and West Yorkshire. But I think of that geography, we're the only one who's had a Made Smarter panel running for a while. And so hopefully we'll be in good shape to know what we're going to do with that money, and also to potentially offer leadership within the Yorkshire region for that. Mandy's also been doing great work on space. We've got a hub being set up, and we're just on the cusp of getting some first initial information about what the shape of the space work that's done in West Yorkshire is already, so that we can direct that work to supporting and improving and growing that work in the space area. We're kicking off some work on digital inclusion, particularly with Contract 3 for superfast broadband. Little bit worried about how that's being put out in West Yorkshire, so Kirsten is pushing particularly hard on that to make sure that we are trying to influence government on how broadband is done at the next stage, making sure that those dreadful stats about our most poor areas being the least well served by superfast broadband is addressed. And £250,000 worth of funding being spent on Brexit advice and support finishes in March 21. We're asking for more because obviously that is still a very hot agenda and stuff that will need to go on beyond March. So I hope you don't mind me just mentioning that as a sort of a background to what I want to say on innovation now, which is clearly the main discussion point of the afternoon. You will have seen the paper. We characterise this innovation stuff as creating the demand for the excellent work that we do on skills. So people are gaining skills in order to do jobs. There needs to be demand for people to actually do the jobs. And that, I think, is in its heart is why we want to really focus on entrepreneurship. You will have seen that the key points in the paper are that we've got 3 strands to what we're proposing to do in this area. This is a start. It's in some initial funding for some initial work. We don't know yet whether the big program that we have in mind, going forward after this initial period will be accepted or not. But it does look very likely that there'll be some money for this initial start. So we're asking you today really to say how you feel about the importance of innovation. Obviously, I feel very passionately that it's one of the most important things that we do. Our culture in Yorkshire isn't necessarily ideal for this in certain ways. We've got challenges that other people don't have, but we also have a heck of a lot of young people and a heck of a lot of diversity and interest, which maybe is richer than many other areas have. So I think, it seems to me it's self-evident that we should be very focused on this, but it would be nice to hear others perhaps echo that and support that and support the propositions that we're looking at. The 3 areas that we're talking about focusing on to start with are inspiring and engaging a greater number of individuals to consider getting into setting up their own business, doing entrepreneurship. So this is pre-startup, which is an area which maybe we haven't been that strong in terms of LEP type support for business. A start is being made on this already. It would be really nice to put a lot more energy into this, and particularly with, again, the number of young people that we have and the diverse communities that we have, not necessarily classic type startup type people. This engagement and doing it in an imaginative and new way, I think, could be something where we really make some strides. The second strand is about supporting businesses that have done their startup event. They're up and running and they need support to do what they're doing well and better than they would have done. And colleagues may well be aware of the Adventure programme, which is already running and is an example of the kind of work that we would like to do even more of, supporting businesses that are already running but still in early phase. And then the third strand is to focus on innovation-driven entrepreneurs. So this is looking at people who've perhaps got a patent, got a world-beating idea, and have a concept that is potentially world-beating, literally world-beating, and providing special and dedicated support to them so that they can potentially effect transformation in our region. There is some work already going in that area. Innovation-driven entrepreneurs at IDE is a pilot program that is running there, and it could be that what we decide to do in that area might build on that or look at learning the lessons that have come from that. And certainly there's some eye-catching statistics about the pilot programs that have been running there. 56 learners originally came through from the startup engagement program. 40 of them developed business ideas. We've taken on 15 of them, 22 founders. 2/3 of them identified as diverse, 40% of BAME, half of them are women, 40% of them are outside Leeds City in West Yorkshire. We've got 15 high-profile mentors engaged with them, helping them. We're delivering more than 100 hours input to those founders, which is 10 times more than most other of these startup programs do. And we're getting some traction on that. One of the questions that you were asked in the paper is how might we think about successful models in the region and possibly bringing financiers into the region. I'm personally putting quite a lot of time into that at the moment with colleagues and officials to see if we can build a program which will be alongside the other finance providers for these early stage type people in the region. But building on, and this is the last thing I wanted to say really before throwing it open, building on our special unique feature of what we're looking to do in Leeds, which is, as well as being challengingly and excitingly more diverse than other areas, to try and support the people who want to address challenges which are going to be globally transformational from a social point of view. And that might be a digital business, but it also might not. It might be a STEM type basis, might be manufacturing, or it could be completely left field and a new way of tackling it. And if we had more time, I'd love to take you through some of those 15 businesses that are getting the original pilot support, and you'd see just how very wide the kind of challenges that they're tackling, and just how exciting some of those ideas that currently in the region are. So, Roger, I think that's what I wanted to say. The questions are on the paper. Do you like the idea of entrepreneurship and the support that we would like to offer to it in this format? Have we got some innovative ways of reaching communities who wouldn't normally hear these messages and who might be underrepresented in the entrepreneur community? How can we connect to existing provision and other intermediaries, particularly within communities? I know Amir quite often speaks very well on that. And what role should the LEP play as a coordinator in this ecosystem? I mean, you could just say, forget about it. It's not really a LEP thing, but that doesn't feel right to me. And I think that we're demonstrating in a number of the things that we've done already. I mentioned Adventure. I've mentioned IDE at. We are showing that we can make a difference. Okay.
Thank you, Andrew. So I'm going to bring people in, perhaps to, as I do bring them in, to get their comments on all of those 4 questions. And then we'll perhaps round up. So firstly, Shabir, followed by Kate, followed by Mandy.
Thanks, Chair, and thanks, Andrew. What I just heard was music to my ears today, because I've had a quick glance at the report and listening to the detail what you just went through. There's a lot
Shabir, could you turn the sound up a bit? It's a bit, I can't quite hear, and I don't know other colleagues can't quite hear you, Shabir.
I've got loads of stuff on my laptop, so is that better, Roger?
Yeah, please. That's perfect, thank you.
Yeah, sorry, yes, I had a lot of paper on my laptop, so it sounded like it came a bit muffled. Yeah, I was just saying, Roger, that I had a quick glance at the report, and what Andrew just went through is music to my ears, because there's a lot of stuff what Andrew went through which you can actually cross-read into the item 10 report that we've got tabled, which I'll go through when it's the right time. I think that the key issues regarding that new entrepreneurship, that new innovation, it goes back to what Kate was saying right at the beginning, that the inclusive growth agenda, we need to actually do a lot of good work. And again, I think we are moving in the right direction. The stuff around digital exclusion, we know what the issues are there. So again, if we can just get that more linked into the inclusive growth agenda, that would be great. There's also stuff that is in my report, which I'll cover later on, which can actually add value to the work that Andrew just highlighted. So rather than doing 2 separate pieces of work or 3 or 4, you actually have a suite of stuff that you actually take into whoever you're going to engage with, so you get more bang for your buck, because we're working within a finite resource base. So I can see everything gelling together really nicely. And I think by talking about it, actually reinforces that totality of what we're trying to do. Because looking at things over a number of years, when we're talking about entrepreneurship, innovation, exclusion in whatever form, and the kind of things I hear talking to you guys individually and collectively, we're trying to address the same issues within the same cohort of group of people, which arguably, from my point of view, are the ones who always get left behind. And if you actually link everything what Andrew said with what everyone else has said, I think we're going in the right direction. And I'm quite excited, especially what Brian was saying in terms of the prospects, in terms of the early indicators, in terms of the economy having a bounce back, which is more promising than what we were expecting. So I don't think it's the Build Back Better slogan. I'd actually move away from that and actually start to say that, yeah, we're actually hitting the inequality that exists in society. You can brand it under what you want, but I think it's a step in the right direction. And thanks, Andrew. Really, really excited. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you, Shabir. Just to remind colleagues before I bring in Kate first that our overall economic recovery strategy and the propositions, no less than one fifth of the ask of the centre is directed to this particular initiative, some 340 million should we be successful. Kate, do you want to come in next?
Thank you very much, Chair. Like Councillor Pandor, I massively welcome this report. Thank you so much, Andrew. It's very, very exciting. I love the focus of those three areas, and innovation. You're absolutely right. It's the area to get excited about, but very much the pre-startup area I felt was absolutely spot on. I guess my request is please do reach out and work with those of us that are already working in this area. I know Kamran may be too modest to say it himself, but he's doing extraordinary work currently in Bradford with the local access programme, and it would be amazing to build on the fantastic work that's starting to happen there. So you know, there are wheels that have been invented, and it'd be great to use those wheels rather than ignore them, as it were. But I suppose the other point that I would like to make is that this is absolutely the moment to engage with the community sector closely, because the community sector is itself having to reinvent its business model, and entrepreneurship and innovation and new ideas and a closer working relationship with business is exactly what's needed to kickstart that kind of swiveling on a sixpence that the community sector does so brilliantly, but sometimes needs a little bit of encouragement and perhaps a bit of resource to achieve. So really great news, and I hope that's useful. Thank you.
Thank you, Kate. Before I come to you, Mandy, Cameron, you might want to just mention to board colleagues, even though it might be short notice, the event tomorrow that you are hosting, because some may find, if they've got a bit of time in the diary, they might want to join it. So do you want to just quickly share? I think it would be a good thing to do so, Cameron.
Yeah, thank you, Roger. And I'll post a link to the registration in the chat if you allow me to. Yeah, so we've done a partnership with PwC. PwC run a social entrepreneurs club nationally, and we've been a member of it for a number of years. And we've partnered with PwC to launch a program called Sustain, and it's very timely given the roadmap to recovery was announced on Monday. It's a program for social entrepreneurs or impact-driven entrepreneurs post-pandemic, post-response and recovery phase. We're going to be giving masterclasses, mentoring, access to Impact Hub membership. We're going to do a huge amount of work around marketing and comms and raising the profile of these organisations. A 6-month program. Tomorrow we've got the launch of it. So if you want to learn more, I'll put a link into the registration. We've had over 70 people already registered. We've got Lee Dobbins, who heads up PwC Bradford, as one of our speakers. And yeah, we'd be very keen for you guys to share that. But thank you, Kate, as well, for that shout out from me, and thank you, Roger, for the opportunity.
Thank you, Cameron. Welcome, Rashik. Just in time, we'll be getting to your item shortly. So who am I going to go to next? Mandy, I think it's your turn, isn't it? Mandy.
Yeah, thank you, Roger. I think it's a fantastic report and I really support it. One of the areas that I wonder whether we could also include is entrepreneurship. So it's looking at how we innovate in businesses that already exist, and coming back to the point I made earlier about resilience. If we can provide an opportunity for businesses to look at their business model and innovate completely using some of the amazing opportunities, support and funding that we have in the region, we might be able to springboard this even further.
Good point. Thank you, Mandy. I think Mark Roberts is next in the order.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to, sort of like the others who've gone before me, add my big support to this topic. I think it's a hugely important area, Andrew. I think the paper's really helpful, and I really am encouraged to see that the 3 areas are covered. Just a few points on the specifics maybe of each one. I think for engaging the pre-startups, we really need to start with the inspiration, and I think we've got some amazing local success stories in all different communities. And I think making it very, very personal that people can relate to. And I think we're quite good at showcasing some of those on more traditional platforms. So for example, I think I've got a session on West Yorkshire Innovation Week. But I think there's also different platforms on social media that are perhaps, you know, go into communities which might not engage so much with those more established channels. And I think storytelling is the right way to go about that. Exactly what Kate was saying with the work that Cameron's doing. I think the second point I just wanted to make on the first 3 years, I certainly have a personal insight on my journey that I think is shared with a lot of entrepreneurs, that there's the first 6 months, many people get along with enthusiasm alone. And from about 6 to 12 months, possibly 18, it stalls a bit and realities sit in and cash flow pressures and how am I going to fund my life and things. And I'd really encourage like that period as something to focus on, to try to stop the drop off of people and just give them a little boost to try to get them into the more established phase. And then I think the third point, and I think this is exactly what you were talking about with mentoring, Andrew, is around the practicalities versus the theory. I think there's lots of very good practical advice that entrepreneurs who have been there and done that can tell, which is a bit different to theory. And I think mentoring is great for that sort of one-to-one conversation and really helpful. I just wonder how we can get some of those as one-to-many. So like getting some of those practicality stories out to many more businesses than might not be possible in a one-to-one mentoring sense. So, but overall, really, really support this, Andrew, as I'm sure you know. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark. And I think, again, if the Secretariat can pick up just to make sure that all board members are aware of West Yorkshire Innovation Week in March and the dates that it's taking place, so that if they wanted to at least not so much be involved but attend, then at least they're aware of that. So I think I'm going to Simon Pringle next.
Thank you, Chair. And thanks to previous contributors. And there's some great points there. I'm not going to echo them, but I do support many of the comments made. And also I support the paper very strongly. I think it's a great contribution. We need to see this in the region, both in terms of growth and resilience. My only build relates to the carbon side of things, and it says we doesn't have a strong direct impact from a climate perspective or from a carbon point of view, and that might be true. But what also might be true is we might be able to create a very strong indirect impact, and that speaks a little bit to Mandy's entrepreneurship and also the way in which we bring creative thought to reimagining the way that services are delivered and how existing supply chains or different propositions or products can be repurposed, because there's a tendency to think about green jobs as always having to involve wind turbines or some other form of really very obvious tangible asset that relates to the green economy. They don't. They can be very different. And as we go forward encouraging that type of entrepreneurship and innovation, then we will see a strong indirect contribution, as well as all the other societal and economic benefits as well, I hope.
Thank you, Simon. Over to you, Helen, I think, and then Susan, and perhaps back to you, Andrew, subject to anybody else wanting to comment. Helen.
Yeah, just wanted to echo the support for the paper, and a couple of my points have already been covered, but I just wanted to bring to the fore again the point about social entrepreneurship, and not to forget that. I think the impacts of that can make a massive, and it'd be good to see that pulled out as a clear strand within this. I was going to talk about what Simon's just spoken about as well, but also the thing around most businesses, as Mandy said, are having to reinvent their business models at the moment. And I think that the thing that also needs to mirror that is the skills that young people are taught to be employment ready, and also within school, the creative thinking, problem solving, which is needed for the workplace. So I think the award that was proposed for young people is great, but if there's a way that can go further to look at creative subjects taught in schools, which bring out the problem solving, or if the award has a focus around that, I think all the better.
Thank you, Helen. Susan, I know you've waited patiently. Susan.
Thank you, Chair. So yes, obviously broadly welcome the paper. I think obviously this is one of the hard fought benefits of having devolution and gain share. So we've not been in this pleasant situation before, but it's lovely to have an opportunity to spend money on something that we all obviously value. I think we all agreed, I think, that it needs to happen, but I think the what is really important in this. So what are the objectives and what we're trying to achieve here? And I think that will determine which kind of program and how that is delivered. So I think we need to make sure that the highest number of businesses are created and the highest number of jobs, for example. But then on the other side of that, of course, community entrepreneurship, also needs to do something in tackling those inequalities that Councillor Pandor talked about, in making sure that some of the, if you invest in community entrepreneurship and support people to set up a business, that business might never have happened if you hadn't had that programme, and that is a value in itself. So there's a balance to be struck, therefore, between highest number of jobs created and social value of entrepreneurship in communities that I don't think we've not been able to cover really in this conversation. I think that conversation needs to keep going really and decide where we think the balance is. For the community entrepreneurship, I just make a plea really for that to be worked through, particularly with local authorities, but also from their local authorities into grassroots communities to be able to get to those hard to reach groups, because this has to be about tackling some of those inequalities, which we're all trying to do at the moment, and make sure that there's additionality therefore and not duplication of what's already happening at local level. And finally, I think it's about where are the gaps, because there's other business advice available. You know, if you're setting up a business, normally you get accountants and bankers, etc., who will give advice about business planning. So I really just want to be clear that with the development of the actual schemes, we look at where the gaps are and where we're filling, and don't duplicate what's already there. So I think there's still work to do. I think in principle, I think we're all happy with it. The balance of investment across the 3 programmes and within the 3 programmes, I think is still for debate. And I think that's something that we as leaders, and obviously you, Roger, as the LEP, we need to get together on and make sure we're all happy with that and take it forward so it's successful. Because every penny counts, of course, these days. We've not had any money for so long. We want to make sure it goes a very long way indeed.
Thank you, Susan. I think Cameron wanted to come in, I think, and then Joanna, and I'm probably going to go back to Andrew. Oh, and Amir. So we'll Cameron, Joanna, and Amir.
I think Joanna had been waiting quite a bit of time before me, Chair. So
sorry, she hadn't put her electronic hand up. Okay, thank you for that. Joanna, you've got the floor.
I haven't got an electronic hand, unfortunately, Roger, and that's why I've just got to use this one. Okay. Yeah, I echo everything that's been said so far, and I think it was really really good of Andrew to just highlight how much has been done so far, because when you reel it off like he did at the beginning, it really shows the success stories and the positives that have been achieved so far. And I think this paper really builds on that, and I really support it. And I had a business communications group meeting yesterday, and we discussed this plan as well there, and unanimous support for it within the BCG. There were a number of comments that I just thought I'd raise, because we had quite a rich debate on this. Just to sort of cement the fact that we're doing all the right things, the Chamber and the FSB, for example, had said they'd had reported the most inquiries that they've had for a very long time about setting up a business and small businesses, and support is really needed in this area. So I think that just sort of rubber stamps that we definitely need this. There was a few concerns, however, about funding for small businesses and financing for small businesses. A lot of small businesses seem to be having trouble setting up bank accounts. So there's a question there, is there anything that we can do to investigate what the issue is, and if there's some way around this, because that's obviously going to stop many businesses in the tracks if they can't even get a bank account. So that's an issue that they've been facing. Lots of comments about the green agenda and encouraging startups within this area, and also the rural community needs to be targeted as well, and there needs to be some focus on that area. I think I'd just like to say that with the specific areas, I do agree with the 3 proposed areas, and I know there's a young people's awareness programme. I wonder, has it been considered to duplicate that, to everybody else, you know, the older people that have lost their jobs during the pandemic, for example, rather than just targeting the younger people? Can we not do a dual approach because, you know, they've got more experience? We might just be able to ignite some ideas within these people. So I don't want that sort of community to be forgotten about. And I think the crux of it is going to be the regional campaign to raise awareness. I think it needs to be really ambitious and really bold, and think of some innovative ways of how we actually get that message through, that we're here to help, and there's routes to support them through what is a very exciting but can be challenging time.
Thank you, John. I mean, Eve's put a similar comment about the bank account thing. Perhaps we could take that away and think what we can do. I think the other point before I bring in Cameron and finally Ben, and before going back to Andrew, is that also recognising that you know, there will be some that will really get right. Hopefully, many will get right. Some will not actually quite work, and to fail, as the Americans say, fail fast, but not to be embarrassed by it, but actually just learn from it. And I think this is for me is one of the exciting parts of this, is that it's a mindset shift that says risk and reward. High rewards, you're going to have to take some risks, albeit if we're using public money, we need to be able to explain why those risks are justified. Cameron, do you want to come in, and then Ben, and I will go then to Amir after Cameron, Amir, and then Ben, and we'll go back to Andrew. Cameron.
Thank you, Roger. It's just a quick few points, really. I think one I should have declared earlier, a bit of a conflict in this space, because we do deliver work in this space, and we would like to get involved in delivering some of the stuff. I guess it was building on Councillor Hinchcliffe's point about understanding the impact of entrepreneurship on communities. And if you take, you know, the example of a single mum living in inner city Bradford who's not got a job, who then has mental health problems, who then struggles with her daughter's education, and through entrepreneurship, having a cottage industry kind of little business, earning enough income which has an impact on her mental health, which then means that she can support her daughter better, whose daughter's education. And that's a real life example of someone I know. So I think, you know, the impact of entrepreneurship goes beyond just economy, but on health and well-being and other sectors as well. Someone else says to me that a restaurant on a road is a restaurant on a road, but if you get 10 restaurants on a road, it becomes a destination. And the point I made about regional recovery earlier on, how do we make our city region a destination for those wanting to start a business, that they know that there's a really thriving, mature ecosystem of support, whether they want to be, whether it's a start-up or whether they've got an idea which has kind of been going well for a number of years and they want to grow it. And for that to be a destination, I don't think we can have a single point of entry or a single program that supports all. I think we need a number of programs and we need a mature ecosystem. And I guess the challenge for us here is, how do we think about where that communication between different programs, different partners happens? So if someone comes in, they can easily navigate between a program, a mentor, investment, a place to work from, an office, and how does the LEP create them conditions to make it easy for a startup to navigate that space. But I think broadly it's a great proposition and I'm really excited by it.
Thank you, Cameron. Amir.
Yeah, I again really supportive of it. I was just going to make a quick point really, and that is that the three programs really appear to be focused at people who have come to the conclusion that they've got their vision, they've got their proposition ready to go, and they are now looking at how to take that forward. And I find in my experience that there's a lot of people who haven't reached that first base where they've got a proposition. They know that they've got a business, invariably they've got a business that isn't necessarily working, but they haven't got a vision to how to take it forward. And I think that unless we're using business intermediaries, and unless we've got a way of having some kind of interface that's targeting those intermediaries who have got connections into those organizations and are able to help them with the vision so that then they can respond to one of these three programs, I think that we're missing a big section of the business community. And, I think of, say, an accountant, as Susan mentioned, who was informed about all this, being able to sort of direct somebody not just to it, but has got, there's an interface that's directed at the intermediary as part of the overall mix, so that they can then impart that knowledge to their client base and their user base. So I just think there's something around that space, around the visioning part of it.
Thank you, Mia. Good points well made. Ben, last but by no means least.
Thank you, Chair. So I think there's been some really excellent points made. It's really helpful in terms of shaping what we do next as officers to take this to the next step. I think a couple of observations from me. One is that we've done quite a lot of work trying to find evidence of what works well elsewhere, and for various reasons, that's proven harder than we would have expected. So I think, Roger, your points about risk are well made, because we will have to test some things here that probably there isn't a good evidence base that it's worked, because for some reason, even though such programs have been running for years and years, doesn't seem to be good evidence that's tracked through success over time. The second is that I think, back to Councillor Hinchcliffe's and some others' points, we're at a very early stage in this. There is a lot to do, but it all plays through, I think, particularly Amir's comments, into the question that we've raised around what's the role of the LEP in this process. And I think we see ourselves very much as kind of coordinator of the overall offer to make sure that the gaps are filled, rather than the deliverer of these programs. And we have to think about, therefore, to Kate's point and others, about how we get through to the organisations that can then actively deliver this within communities who know how to overcome some of the challenges that you've highlighted in your comments. So I think we see this as a particularly important but also quite a challenging piece of work to get done over the next couple of months.
Thank you, Ben. I mean, there is a comms issue, but perhaps Andrew might want to not necessarily comment on it, but his colleagues can be thinking about how do we get not only the knowledge out there, but the engagement, the banking community, others, to say, look, this is something that's that we would signpost. Anyway, thank you for all those comments. Andrew, is there anything you would like to say, or in terms of rounding this thing off, and as to whether we've adequately input into the exam questions that you very kindly set for us to comment upon?
No, well, thank you, everybody, particularly for all the very warm support. It's great. There were just a couple of themes I thought I could just bring out. We were very keen, weren't we? Many of the contributors were saying the community entrepreneurship angle is the one that we really need to be majoring on. And yes, that point about how do we reach the hard to get to groups. The innovation driven entrepreneurship Act has piloted a bit of that, Ben, I think, in terms of how do you build a community online of people who wouldn't normally get involved. And I think we have a community of about 350 people engaged with that at the moment, who are very diverse and not the normal. So my hope with this would be that we can maybe carry the torch for community entrepreneurship and maybe make some data for ourselves by being a little bit leading in this area. And themes like Simon's Carbon or the social entrepreneurship that Helen and Kate were referring to will all feed very nicely into that. Avoiding overlapping, yeah. Councillor Pandor was very strong on that too. Making sure that we're creating jobs, that's the point about making the demand for the training. Entrepreneurship and being innovation driven. And I'll just end up by saying that, keeping this idea of the wishing to solve major global social challenges as what we're trying to do, to be transformational, to really make a big difference, not only to our region, but to the world. I think that's the inspiration that I hope that we can be putting out to everybody, really. Thank you, Roger.
Thank you, Andrew. And just to remind people in economic terms, rather than just improving the gradient of the economic recovery or growth, how to create conditions not only for the indigenous businesses that we've already got, but those not yet even conceived. How do we create more of a hockey stick in terms of the economic growth, the dividend from which will hopefully help fuel solving some of those long-standing problems in our society. So thank you on behalf of all of us to you, Andrew, and the team, but also thank you for all those contributions. And I guess this is the beginning, not the end of this particular journey. And I'm glad to say that our region is well ahead when it's come to the thinking of this. It's, the next stage is the adequacy of resources to implement at scale. So thank you for that. So I think we will move on. I should just brightline that I had hoped we might finish around 4:15, even though the meeting's scheduled to 5. We'll see where we go, because I know a few people have to leave at 4. One of whom is Rashik. I know he's had a busy day, so I'm delighted he's here to introduce, I think, initially the agenda item 9 and the refresh of a plan that we put together back in, I don't know, 2014 or otherwise, that is going to morph into a framework and interestingly links to what we've just been talking about and what we will talk about, the further iteration of inclusive growth, because they're a kind of triangle of activity rather than just individual silos, back to Councillor Pandor's point earlier. So Rashid, welcome.
Yeah, thanks, Roger. And we actually had the ESP meeting yesterday, which was excellent, because we went through the adult education program, the skills refresh, and also some of the other activities we've got, which all kind of come together to support this program. Now, the key focus here, of course, was, and everybody is supporting that, is the need for investment. We're not going to make progress without having investment, and some of the changes in the adult education budget gives us some opportunity to go do that. But there's a recognition to build around our strategic priorities. So we've laid out our priorities in the economic plan. We can align the skills framework to that particular plan and help us be successful. We're anticipating launching this earlier in the year, but of course, as part of the changes with the pandemic, we're using that to really harden this and get it to a place where we can make a difference. Now, in the paper, you'll see we've shifted from a plan to a framework, and the framework really sort of lays out the ambition and lays out the structure for how we're going to try and make that change. The government's plans for trailblazers and some pilots around the trailblazers also gives us another opportunity. So we will be making a strong focus on that and try and win something there. I think that gives us again the region an opportunity to leverage. The biggest challenge that I think we face, and this is where I think we've got to really get some help here, is given the diversity of the community in the region from a business perspective, how do we get them engaged around this? And how do we build up that momentum and excitement around this framework and this plan, so that we can build the skills that we need for growth? How do we get that inclusive growth? How do we get the confidence back in some of the skills development that we need to have going forward? Now, I'm not going to go through the papers because there's lots of material in the papers. There's a slide decks and so on which explain this very well. And I hope they're all clear. But I'm more than happy to take some questions here.
Thank you. And I guess what we're ultimately asking, subject to debate discussion, is agreement that we will publish this as a framework, as a subplot of a wider strategic economic framework. So perhaps open it up for questions, comments from colleagues.
One thing I forgot to mention, Roger, I should have mentioned as well. Andrew and I had a very valuable conversation with the big panel in ESP, because obviously there's a big linkage between what the innovation group is doing and what the skills agenda is doing. So we're trying to stay much more connected together here. So that I think that's goodness. And both panel members were very very grateful for that session, I think.
I think it also, some of the data reflects some changes that's going on in this agenda. Whilst on the one hand, HE entrants seem to be relatively stable, but actually, as compared to 2015-16, apprenticeships about 40% down. What's going on there? And also linking to the next agenda item, but then the fact that a third of the people in Leeds City region live in in the top 20% of the most deprived areas in the country. You know, how the hell do we square all that? So I'm going to go, and forgive me because I was just looking at my notes. I'm going to go in this order. So if I've got in the right order, there's no malice aforethought. I'm going to start with Peter Mucklow, and then I'm going to go through Helen, Kate, Mandy, and Simon in that order. Peter.
Thanks very much, Roger, and thanks for the set of papers, which are really impressive and comprehensive. I think if you kind of look for the sort of central big idea in this, I think there is a central big idea, which what's your lift conversation on this, which is around quality technical education, and I think that's really important for the city region. As well as more widely, because it really has the potential to hit the sweet spot between the economic benefit, the employment benefit, and the individual benefit through having an education system which is socially inclusive and which attracts people of all abilities and all prior educational backgrounds, which actually combines further education and higher education. Because of course there's already a massive technical education component within HE. So I think I kind of encourage that view of the big idea. I think the challenge is, well, what are the levers then that the city region and the combined authority can use? I do agree with you that the adult education budget devolution deal, whatever the size of that, is really significant, because it gives you the sort of the right and the leverage really to continue delivery agreements with the FE colleges, but also to extend them with other non-college recipients of the adult education budget. And I think that'll be really important in ensuring that priorities written in PowerPoint presentations actually have some leverage and can be translated into action by the people who are actually providing the education and training. And adult education budget has traditionally been used primarily for lower level skills, below level 2, digital, English and math, which are really, really important, and the commitment to inclusive growth is to be applauded. But the introduction of a new sort of entitlement to adults to free tuition in some high quality vocational level 3 qualifications, and there's 61 in construction alone, for example, is also really significant. I do think there are some areas here where I continue to believe that the city region is kind of potentially leading the way nationally. I mean, Reboot, I think continues to have the potential to show the way for a national skills fund, particularly in terms of retraining and upskilling adults. It can never be all about young people. The future goals, the FE white paper talks about bringing together the Careers and Enterprise Company and the National Careers Service, where there must be something to learn from future goals there, and happy to broker into the right people. And in my own personal area of responsibility, the Apprenticeship Levy Support Service, we're going to make that easier through digital services which enable employers to pledge and large employers to find small employers. But that will not remove our enthusiasm for intermediaries who can make that happen in a sort of strategic way, either within a geography such as Leeds City Region or within an industry sector. So I applaud the refresh and making it into a framework building on all the work that's gone before. Thanks, Roger.
Thank you, Peter, and it's useful. It's very helpful to have those remarks and support, and I'm sure in the corridors that you stalk, you'll be able to subtly make the case for our leading approach to this to national advantage, not just to regional benefits. So Helen, first to you.
Yeah, just to say thank you for the paper. It's really detailed and that was really helpful. I just wanted to make the point, which I did with the previous paper, was that I think teaching those skills in schools before you get to the kind of post-16 or even the kind of GCSE level around creative thinking, creative subjects is valid here as well as in the previous paper. And then just to come on to where you're talking about sectoral engagement, I think with the arts and entertainment sector, a massive shift which has been speeded up throughout the pandemic has been the move to digital, and how we're consuming arts and culture has radically changed over this last year and will continue to do so. And, you know, programming online, how we're using Netflix as opposed to cinemas, it crosses all that sector. So I would consider engaging the arts and creative sector around the digital agenda, because it's a very big topic at the moment. Likewise, apprenticeships, it's something that sector has always struggled with, and there are an awful lot of technical roles within that sector that could have some really good work-based training around them.
So Helen, if you can come back on just a couple of things there on the creative one and the digital skills in the creative. That was a big discussion in the skills panel yesterday. So it's a topic that's very dear to my own heart and my day job. So yeah, very happy to pick that up separately as well.
Great, thanks.
I think Kate, I'm going to go to next, Kate.
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, I thought likewise, I really welcome the paper. I think it's got a lot of thought gone into it, and some really excellent triangulation, as the Chair had mentioned, picking up Councillor Pandea's points earlier about all ducks sort of getting into alignment, which is brilliant. I suppose it's just pushing on some of the detail and some of the language. So I think in terms of the 9 recommendations, all the inspiration and the focus feels absolutely right. I just would hope, and I'm sure you would, to do a really proper investigation of what that what access means, and clearly Helen's already picked up the point around digital exclusion, which I'd also like to endorse. And maybe by just adding a few further examples. So I think the digital poverty, if you like, of some of those communities that are most disadvantaged is a major issue. It continues to be a major issue despite investment, despite a lot of kit being made available. There is still a gap there, and I don't think that's something we can just assume is sorted. I know again this comes up on the next paper, so I won't go on about it, but I think the other point is around the education gap. I was speaking with Professor Judy Archibong from the University of Bradford earlier in the week, and she was just talking about the increasing concern that she and her colleagues are seeing in terms of the impact for kids currently in the schooling situation, having experienced the lockdowns that we've had, have been pushed so far behind. So there's a real need to focus, I think, on the reality of that education gap. So this comes to my final point, which is there is a lot of change that's going to be needed. Doing the same as before isn't going to be good enough. That business as usual. And so my point, as per before, is around using the community sector to broker the relationships that are going to be needed. Really try and work with people who are already trusted by, disengaged individuals, and work with them to provide those opportunities, because the more they are not addressed, the bigger that gap becomes. Thank you.
Thank you, Kate. You make a very powerful point. I think there is something that really is going to take a number of years to fix, but as long as we've got the size and scale of that educational gap problem properly assessed, then at least we'll have a chance to remedy what we're letting our young folk across the whole spectrum down with, not through any fault of any of us on this call or beyond, but it's an inconvenient truth. We've got to do something about it. And against an annual education budget measured in double digits of billions, the solution needs to be commensurate with the size of the challenge. It's all I will say. Mandy, you wanted to go next, Mandy.
Thanks, Roger. love the report, and it's good to see the Future Skills Ready Commission report informing some of the thinking in it, which I know a number of people on this board were part of. And also, I'm glad to see that the Local Digital Skills Partnership is also involved, which I'm a co-chair of, which is hoping to address some of the issues that were raised around digital poverty, not just connecting to equipment, connecting to data too. I think that's critical. One of the things that I'm not sure is picked up in the report, and it might be in another area that I'm not seeing, but is within the Future Skills Ready Commission, we talked about making sure that companies were engaged with delivering skills training programs and upskilling their workforce. And I think that's something that leadership skills we need to pick up on, in terms of companies realizing what it is they don't know that they don't know. And my company was one of those that went through a transformation program and has changed dramatically as a result of that. And because of that, we now have a workforce that has been through upskilling and is going through upskilling constantly to make sure that we are resilient for the future, a point that I mentioned earlier. I mean, it's worth noting that, Andy Murray has a coach, Tiger Woods has a coach, and I think business leaders need to constantly improve their own ability. So it would be good if that was included in there somewhere. And I think also that when we're looking at grants, we should not only look at providing jobs, but look at providing skills as part of the reasoning behind grant funding, as a way of encouraging those employers to actually upskill their workforce and therefore upskill our region.
And indeed, some of them themselves upskill. So I'm going to go to, I think, Simon and Mia, and then Susan. Simon first.
Thank you. Let's keep my comments brief. Welcome the paper. Thanks, Rashik, and drawn to section 3 in terms of the cross-referencing to the Green Economy Panel input. I mean, it's great to see it reflected there as a kind of a horizontal or as a cross-cutting theme. And I think that's, as a region, where we need to get to in terms of green economy, and the fact that the overlapping skills, as we talked about in an earlier section, are just important not to be seen as other or separate. They're part of a transition, but particularly wanted to note, given what we're going to be talking about later, the references to just transition, and recognizing that the other side of the inclusive growth coin is, of course, maintaining a just transition as we do seek to decarbonize the economy that we have already, because it does tend to correlate in terms of those high carbon jobs with areas of multiple deprivation or greater economic challenge. So great to see that that's in there also. I'll not unpack that now, but just to draw colleagues' attention to that little section 3.
Thank you. I think, you did have your hand up, or at least I thought you did. So if you want to come in, by all means, come in now.
Well, I put a comment in the chat anyway, but it was just to really say that, can we take advantage of companies that are doing online CPD training to extend that to a wider audience, and because there's no cost to them, and I think it's a really great way of them engaging with sort of future employees.
I guess one of the things that come on my radar in recent weeks is the work of the Chartered Management Institute, and to what extent we should be thinking about. As indeed, I know one of our former private sector colleague, Professor Bob Crine, has done with the University of Huddersfield. A number of the senior people in the university have gone through the Chartered Manager courses, but perhaps something we could just take away and have a think about. And last but by no means least, the chair of the Future Ready Skills Commission, Susan. Before I go back to Rashik for some wind-up points and perhaps the recommendation before he has to go. Susan.
Thank you, Chair. And just to remark, really, obviously this morning was the launch of the West Yorkshire Labour Market Survey data. And that is, I'm not sure if anybody in this room was in it, but it's a vast array of data we've got, which is really thought-provoking, and also makes you think about the scale of the challenge as well that we all have to undergo. So the plan, I think, is the right plan. I know Rashik and I have worked together on this, and I've spoken many times about it before. The Future Ready Skills Commission, you're right, Amanda, was a really great piece of work. So thank you to you and to other colleagues who've been on that to get us in a position where we're able to do this refresh. I think it's going to help us with a few things. Obviously, future further education white paper that government are doing, but actually it is the scale of the challenge that we've got. So we've invested 13.5 million of our gain share money into skills. but actually we could do with adding a few more notes on that, to be quite honest, to make a real impact on some of the figures that we've seen across that West Yorkshire Labour Market Survey. So I know we've got a colleague from governments on, and I know I'm sure he's challenging people at base, back at base for that. But I do think we need to use all our channels to government to lobby a skills agenda, as well as transport and culture, is the three things I always talk about, is really vital to turning around our economy, particularly after the year we've gone through. And obviously we saw at the front of the meeting that GDP has gone down 10% nationally. So investment in skills, transport, culture, and then we'll be all right. But it does need significant ambition from central government to work with us in a co-production model, so it can really make a difference to some of those really quite, alarming numbers really we're seeing in terms of education and skills attainment levels at the moment. So,
and just to echo your earlier points, I think Kate in particular, we've got an unquantified problem at the moment as to what our attainment gap with our young folk has resulted from no fault of anybody over the disruption of education. And as I said, you could take an extreme position, which is utterly ridiculous, that says, you know what, let's just cancel last year and start again. Well, on the basis that costs about £45 billion of taxpayer money and has all sorts of adverse implications on colleges and universities and all the rest of it, I wouldn't even suggest it. On the one hand, on the other hand, the scale of the investment, together with other things, need to be commensurate with the size and shape of the problem that we don't quite know yet. And I think it's for us locally, and maybe you and your colleague Susan, as well as chief execs, but also the private sector, to try and be kind of clear if we can, and face the inconvenient truths, as well as then seek the supportive remedies, so that we don't have something of a lost generation. It's a phrase I don't like, but I think we've got to be also candid. Thank you for that. Rashik, I'm going to come back to you, assuming I've covered everybody, and I'm just checking I have, as to perhaps just round this thing off and hopefully seek the board's agreement that we publicise this framework. And I have asked, by the way, Rashik, if officers will put together a very short note with the framework on a page and some of those highlight the elevator points, so that when they're out and about, they can explain, so what's different, and how does this address the here and now, but importantly the future, as compared to just another updated plan from yesteryear.
Yeah, and firstly, thank you all for the vote of confidence here, because this is an important agenda for the region, and I think colleagues have done a fabulous job to get us to where we are right now. And I echo Peter's point of, we need to make sure that there is a very clear, big agenda here around technical skills. And that was one of the topics we covered yesterday, making sure that this not just addresses the young people, but it also addresses the whole of the community, helps us build the skills that will progress and fuel the growth that we want, the inclusive growth that we want to have. So with that, I'm assuming everybody's comfortable with us, supports us going forward with this plan. We'll follow up on Roger's points and all your points as well. So thank you for that.
Thank you. So can I just check, perhaps with the traditional thumbs up in this digital world we're in, that you're happy that we do publicise? Yeah, thank you very much for that. And thank you for everybody's comments and input, and particularly thank you to you, Rashik, for leading on this agenda, as you've done over the whole of my tenure to date on this, just about on the skills agenda. So thank you for that. We'll now segue, I think, into we've touched on it many times. We did have discussion at the last board meeting about inclusive growth. So I think we'll talk about where we've got to, and I think supported by Alan and James, Alan Rees and James Flanagan. I think Shabir, I think you want to make some opening remarks and introduce this.
Yeah, thanks, Roger. You probably recall back in January, the meeting, we talked about the inclusive growth framework, how we start to address the socio-economic inequalities, and I think this meeting's shown how far we've gone in terms of actually addressing that, which is quite heartening. Just to remind members, comrades, colleagues, the agreement in January was the third sector role, how public-private partnerships can actually integrate and work together in addressing the inclusive growth agenda. We also talked about a set of indicators to see what's going well, not what's not going well, what measures we can put in place and how we can actually support the inclusive growth agenda in terms of addressing all the issues we so dearly have to our hearts. Also, we talked about proposals of interventions, a forward programme, a pipeline of schemes that we can actually develop as we move forward in terms of how we achieve the ambitions by increasing the LEP capacity, and at the same time how that ambition is delivered, how that actually becomes something that we can actually say that this has actually come out of what we're trying to do. It's not just words or ambitions on a piece of paper, it's actually delivery to change lives and develop a better society. Also, what we talked about was how we can actually communicate, because I think communication is vital in terms of what we're doing, because we cover such a vast geographical area, and how the inclusive growth agenda embeds in the wider LEP aims and ambitions and objectives. We also identified some early wins and what the impact can be in terms of having them early wins, and critically how the barriers that we also aware of, how we can actually address them. And an example is the sector engagement. What are the barriers and how can we actually unlock that potential that we know is already there. So this report is actually split into two sections where we need to just focus on. Firstly, it's the set of indicators which talked about earlier on, which I'll come on to in a minute, and the early wins, which I'll also talk about. The indicators, for example, the years of healthy life. People are living longer, but the quality of life is an issue. And we need to understand how we can actually start to address that issue. West Yorkshire as a whole underperforms in life expectancy, quality of life as people get older, and within each local authority, and I know Councillor Hinchcliffe and Councillor Sifter here, they'll agree that we also have that similar imbalance within local authority areas. So there's also some work to do at a local level. It's not just West Yorkshire and that's it. There are some parts of West Yorkshire which will be above the national average, and some which will be below the national average. So there's also a lot more digging down in more detail to actually do. Early years, 0 to 5 years old, again, that's a massive issue. And we've seen a new set of research and some evidence base that's going to be developed over the next few months, few years. What has a pandemic done to actually create a worse situation? We know things haven't got better; it's got worse. So what is it, and how can we make sure that 0 to 5 year old development is actually improved? At the moment, the 20-point gap between kids who are on free school meals compared to the kids that are on free school meals, and I suspect that that's actually got worse. Happiness and well-being and anxiety. Again, in West Yorkshire, we were in a good situation, but just before the pandemic, it's not as a result of the pandemic. Just before the pandemic, we started seeing evidence that the well-being and happiness and people feeling good about their place, about their community, was actually starting to dip, which is quite surprising because for the last 10 years, since 2011, we weren't so bad. Now, I suspect, being a local council leader, that the austerity and the last 10 years of local authority cuts has actually lagged behind, and I think it takes time for that to actually come through. And actually, people are realising that actually, the quality of life has actually got a lot worse. And as local authority leaders, we see that too often, because we from a community point of view, we deal with that on a daily basis. So that's just regarding the suite of indicators which we can talk about. The early wins, that's something that we need to actually focus on, and there's criteria that's been set out under paragraph 2.7 that we could use in terms of how we can actually go forward. That'll need to be costed out, and we'll also need to establish some kind of value for money framework, and combined authority approval will be needed to actually see what we can't do and what we can do, and how that links into the single investment fund. The early wins, again, this is on the report, but I'll just quickly go through it, Roger, because I think it's worth going through it. The good work standard. A third of West Yorkshire workers are in a place of work where its conditions are not good. So there's a lot of work that we need to do. A third is quite a startling statistic. We need a regional work standard. We need to actually prioritise how this links into the economic recovery plan. And I know Susan's been doing some fantastic work around that with many of you who are on this panel. I know that the term "build back better" is used, and I don't want to get too political, but to me, it's about addressing the sharp inequalities that have been inherent in all our communities for decades, and this pandemic has actually probably made that situation worse. So it's how we address some inequalities, and it's about how we encourage, energise the business sector, the public sector, and the third sector to become part of what we're trying to address. What sort of recruitment selection policies they are, and how do they add value, the diversity, pay and conditions, and how does that impact on their health and well-being, and also retirement, because a lot of people, you know, they will have be on a pension, and the quality of their work, how does that impact on their retirement? It needs to actually add value. Digital inclusion, we've talked about that, and a number of papers have covered this, but I think it's just worth mentioning that, and let's start looking at the detail. There's still a lot of work to do. 16% of Yorkshire and Humber individuals have still not got the right level of digital skills, and accessibility is a major issue. And again, it's the most disadvantaged, the community that are in poverty, and unfortunately young people. You know, I take it for granted my daughter, who's doing her A-levels, she's working at home, and she's got a laptop and she's got all the gear. But there are a lot of young people who are actually being, it's a double whammy. They're not in school, they don't have that facility at home, and the outcome will be their life chances have actually been deteriorated even further. So what we need to do, we need to have some minimum standards in terms of accessibility and online access, because the world's moving on, and we need to make sure that Yorkshire and Humber and all the constituent parts within Yorkshire and Humber moves along with it and try and get ahead of the curve. Inclusive skills, again, the previous report talked about skills agenda, which is a massive issue. Social mobility needs to be the bedrock of any skills agenda, I think. Disabled people, for example, 3 times more likely to have no formal qualifications. I was startled at that statistic, and they are more likely to be unemployed. This is something that we are facing, and I suspect, again, that situation is going to get worse as we move out into a new recovery. So what we need to do, we need to do more outreach engagement, and this is why I was quite heartened when Andrew was talking, you know, the sort of stuff he was talking about in terms of engagement and getting out there and talking to employers and getting to schools. You know, it's so good to hear that it's all I think Kate mentioned lining your ducks in a row, and I think they are getting lined up in a row. How do we track young people as they come out of pre-16 to post-16 and beyond? And how do we actually track the kids that are not in education, employment and training? How do we make sure that nobody falls through the gaps? So we need to start looking at targeted measures. There's also an issue regarding children in care and children with special needs. So again, you know, this is an area of work that we need to focus on, because although we are doing really good work around that, we still do need to do more, and that's what the paper covers. On the back of the pandemic, I'm getting a lot of casework regarding people's health and well-being, and how can we start to look at social prescribing. West Yorkshire, again, we above average in terms of the level of people, individuals with mental health linked illnesses, which is, you know, quite startling. We seem to be on top of the league table for the wrong reasons. We need to be there for the right reasons. Anxiety increasing, and I mentioned earlier on that before lockdown there was indications that it was already happening. The lockdowns probably accelerated and made things work. You know, simple stuff like holding a job, securing a job, you know, making sure that, you know, they've got some kind of future. How do we start to address that? And it's linking individuals who suffer to volunteering, to exercise, training development, and it's all the stuff that we're talking about. You know, we just need to make sure that we actually try and cover all the issues we're talking about. The voluntary community sector, social enterprise, and the support that's around that needs to also to be addressed in this. Is to look at the disadvantaged areas. We talked about innovation to address the socio-economic and environmental issues. Again, it's so important how we help the third sector to become more entrepreneurial, and how do we actually encourage that enterprise that we're talking about. So there's targeted prioritization that needs to take place. We need to actually develop specialist advice. We need to develop new learning and how we can actually share that learning, and how we can actually expand that networking. Because a lot of the times you realize that we're talking to the same people. How do we actually crack that nut and actually broaden that network? And Amir makes valid points all the time, how we get into certain communities that don't feel that they're supported. So developing a hub around the place-based investment is really, really important. We need to actually look at how we can actually dedicate some resource around that without undermining the value for money element which we're talking about, because we need to make sure that whatever we do encapsulates everything. So we just need to do it once, but we do it once and it's done right. How can we look at flexible working spaces and how we can develop more opportunities to collaborate and innovate? And again, Andrew's paper was really, really happening that innovation, that entrepreneurship, to actually encapsulate the whole of the agenda. We've got some great examples, in this room, in this virtual room. The work Kate's doing in Gipton Fire Station. The impact of the hub that Cameron's doing in Bradford. So what we need to do is we need to look at how support and investment would be complementary to what they're already doing. So what we need to do is develop a criteria, make sure that the value for money that's linked into that, and what's appropriate, what's proportionate, and what's the right level of investment. Because we need to make sure that we're a conduit for change, not become the change agents themselves, because we can't do everything, but it's how we actually get the region, get all this crystallized at a local level, and how we can explore more partnerships. So, Chair, very quickly, I've nearly finished. So, conclude. I'd welcome comments on the dashboard and the indicators which are highlighted in paragraph 2.5, I think. And views and comments welcome. We need to agree, at least in principle, the early wins. It's really, really heartening for when I hear all the reports, because you get to a stage where you realise actually it's all coming together. Because for the past few years, you were like, God, how do we get all this together? But I'm quite energised, quite positive, Roger, that we actually hopefully got a good future ahead. Thanks a lot.
No, thank you, Shabeen. You remind me, and Eve will probably smile, that her and I think, not necessarily co-authored, but certainly co-shared in the Sunday Times a few weeks back by Lord O'Donnell, and it's on the side here. Can we be happier? An interesting book, worth a read. That's for another day. But thank you, Shabeen, and thank you for the passionate way in which I think you speak for all of us, what we all want to achieve. So before us is a discussion about the the kind of indicator set, as well as the early interventions. And I'll just take comments and thoughts. And I know Alan and James Flanagan, who I think James is on the call, will probably rather note things at this juncture. We will, as with the entrepreneurship and as with the employment skills plan framework, we will be coming back to these things. But I'm going to open it up and rather than being last, first, Susan.
Thanks, and thank you, Councillor Pandor, for all the work you've done on this. And I agree with all the comments you made. It's such an important part of what we do. If a climate emergency and inclusive growth, if we can achieve those two objectives, I think, as I said earlier, will make a huge difference to the people of this region, and we'll be more economically successful. So why wouldn't you do that? And my question was really around the work charter, good work charter, and about the development of that, because I'd like to see that being something that is well known about, and that all businesses can sort of have a checklist, like 5 things to make sure you're a good employer, for example. Some of the slides sound a little bit labour intensive, and I'd like it to be something that people can see. Well, actually, yes, I do 4 out of 5 of those things. So self-regulated is what I'm saying, really, to actually get to more people. Because otherwise it's going to become a really niche minority sport, and we need to make sure that we encourage the widest number of businesses possible to participate in this and raise the level of the game to make sure that they're more inclusive. So just what is the timeline for achieving that, and how are we involved?
Okay, let me take Simon's comment, and then I'll come back to Shabir, subject to anybody else want to come in. Simon, you're on mute, Simon.
Sorry, thank you. Yes, my comment was prompted entirely by the previous one by Susan's around that around that approach. It's not one that I'm particularly familiar with, but I am reminded how long it took for people to move from the mindset of minimum wage to living wage, and how in different areas it took a long time to move people from de minimis regulatory standards as being something that was a sufficient sort of level of focus to things that are more in line with either sectoral expectations or societal expectations. So I wonder if there's some learning that can be taken from some of those journeys and evolutions and applied to that, and to encourage what's quite obviously a very positive endeavour and ambition.
Do you want to come back in before I seek any other comments? And hopefully we can agree the direction of travel I set out in the paper. Shabir.
Yeah, no, I think what Susan mentioned and what Simon mentioned, I completely agree with you. And I think Simon's point regarding the learning we got from the minimum wage, the living wage, because from a business point of view, I can completely understand that from their business model, it needs to have that complete buy-in, and we learned a lot. So with the good work standard, I suppose it's probably a bit more easier, because this is from my personal view only, and I'll ask James and Alan to come in regarding timescales and what they've got planned in terms of details. But from my personal perspective, the good work standard is just about being a good employer, and reading the detail in terms of recruitment and selection, diversity, having that good cohort of skills and experience and different mindsets, adds value to your business model, I think. And I think many years ago, you might remember, Roger, that Dixons were one of the most diverse, Dixon Electrical was one of the most diverse employers, and it then mirrored on the bottom line, either profit or loss at the end of the day. So I think that's probably more easy to do. I think regarding the minimum wage or the living wage, although we've made some strides, we need to do a lot more in that. But valid point. Alan and James, I don't know if you want to come in regarding timescales and how we might start to do this on the ground.
Yeah. So, Andrew's just put it in the chat. It's been discussed in a bit already by both the Inclusive Growth Panel, Shabir, and by the Employment and Skills Panel, and it's a big panel tomorrow. We're looking to establish a working group to take it forward. But what we want to do, there's no point in reinventing the wheel here. There are other places that have got employment charters and similar, and we're looking to build on the best of those. But make sure that it is appropriate for our particular circumstance. So we'll set up this group to steer it and then implement it later this year. I'm not sure of the exact timescale. James may come in.
Thanks, Alan. Given we do have a number of other standards in view, it does help us to accelerate the process somewhat, as long as there's some consensus around what the standard should look like. And we're working through that at the moment and looking to establish in short order a wider partnership-based reference group, including employers and other key players. So in principle, there's no reason why we couldn't get something established by early summer. I would say would be a healthy ambition. I think in terms of Councillor Hinchcliffe's point, there is something about wanting to push the highest possible standards, and that is going to be a minority interest in to some degree. But there's also a way that some standards can be tiered as well to get a much bigger funnel. So you have a range of supporters of a standard, and then those that sign up to the highest possible accreditation. So that might be a way of squaring the circle, of having something that is genuinely stretching at the highest levels, but also doesn't just limit it to a few businesses.
Thank you, James. It may be something we need to think about, how we, people feel so compelled in relation to this good work standard that, as with other things they put on their letterhead and all of their business correspondence and invoices and other things, whether digitally or delivered by Mr. or Mrs. Postman or Miss Postman, whether we should think about that. Perhaps that's for another day. Conscious that time's ticking by, and thank you for the elements in the chat, Andrew and Kate. I guess what I want, and we will come back to this because these are going to be recurring golden threads of our conversation going forward as we come through all that which we've experienced the last 12 months. Can I just check in that people are happy with the recommendations under para 9 on pages 139 and 140 as a staging post for this journey? And if so, perhaps a quick thumbs up would just confirm that. Yep, we're getting the thumbs up. Thank you. We've got electronic ones as well, Kate. Thank you. I'm going to hand obviously to Angela next. I'm hoping, so long as we can deal with items 11, 12 relatively quickly, we might just have just a few moments on agenda item 13, which is there for information subject. I'm going to look to Alan shortly as to whether people are on the call that can help us, the connectivity plan, because it's about how do we get more business engagement into this important topic, and looking to private sector colleagues to perhaps throw in some thoughts or otherwise that we could gather today or subsequently. So I'm going to now go to Angela. I think it's fairly self-evident the paper, but over to you, Angela.
Thank you, Chair. And yes, mindful of time, I'll try and keep it brief. So it is hopefully fairly self-evident paper. It's simply providing a bit of an update on where we are in terms of funding. So highlighting that the budget was approved by the Combined Authority on the 4th of February. We present both the capital and revenue budgets as a combined authority and LEP budget, recognising the alignment between the priorities of both boards. As we've seen earlier on in the meeting, there has been some really good results previously in terms of funding awarded to the LEP. We're currently in a bit of an uncertain situation where we have certain funding streams coming to an end, and it is unclear really where the future is in terms of funding that is being focused towards LEPs. So the good news is we've had the core funding reconfirmed for next year, which came through very late in the day, but is there, which is helpful. We've obviously got the Getting Building Fund that is that came to the LEP and Combined Authority to manage. There may be some announcements in the budget next week that we are still waiting further information, for example, on the Levelling Up Fund and who is able to apply for that. We included in the report in Appendix 1, just a bit of information about some of the sort of cocktail of funding that we have sought to make sure that the LEP priorities are delivered. It's not the most ideal way to build up a programme and plans, but we do take the funding where we can find it. There are clearly some opportunities coming up through some of the devolution funding to address the LEP priority areas. So I think it is reassuring that the board that we are doing our best to secure funding where we can, making the case that LEPs have a role to play in helping garner funding and direct it where it is most needed. And also attached there is Appendix 2, the rather disappointing letter that says that LEPs will not be part of future skills capital funding. And there's obviously a very good track record in this region in that regard. So I'll leave it there for any comments or questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any comments or questions? You're not, but I would actually make a comment, and I'm sure Peter will not so much forgive me, but will understand the confusion in my mind, having received the letter from the minister about how well we've done. And I know from my own personal involvement, and other people on this call, particularly Rashik, who's no longer on the call, in terms of what we've done with our FE colleges, to on the one hand be given plaudits for it, at the same time saying, actually, you've done so well, we're going to do it a different way and give the money directly to colleges based on their project submissions, there's something that doesn't quite reconcile in my mind. But then I'm just a simple businessman. But that's for something that's for another day. What I wanted to do was just check that colleagues are happy just with the recommendations. And again, Peter, unless you wish to comment, I wasn't trying to incite you. In fact, quite the contrary. I just, I guess, I read it and was kind of confused.com, but maybe we'll take it offline unless you want to comment. But
I'm happy to take it offline, Roger. And we've had a bit of a conversation with Ben and Co previously, but yeah.
Right, thank you. Look, so a colleague happy with just noting the position, and yes, there is uncertainty as to the future of LEPs and their role. I can't believe that there isn't going to be a significant role for continuing the partnership arrangement between the private and public sector after what we've all achieved over the last 6 years and what's still to be done. But anyway, that's not necessarily within my gift or anybody on this call's gift, but perhaps we've got some influence to bring to bear. So I'm going to, I'm not sure whether I'm actually handing the chair to you and not Ben in relation to the next item, but it's clearly not appropriate for part of it for me to chair the meeting, or whether we should let Mark as the deputy chair this. I don't mind it, but obviously we want to be procedurally correct, recognising, as I say, part of the next report covers the incumbent chair, namely oneself.
Thank you, Chair. So I think it's probably simpler if I think the only stipulation is that you don't take part in the next in the next item. In essence, the governance paper has got two asks of the LEP board. The first is to agree the terms of reference for a light touch review of the chair. That was agreed. That we agreed we'd do this last year, and we set out in para 2.4 of the paper the terms of reference of that. As much now bound into the future of LEPs and what that's going to look like. So the other key part to that is in para 2.6, where we set out that if the board's content with the terms of reference, then we will enact that with a view to bringing back recommendations and conclusions to the April LEP board to conclude that matter. The second item is around, which Roger could participate in, is the appointment of a TUC member to the Employment and Skills Panel, and that's been an issue that has been discussed, and I think most board members are aware of. So again, seeking the board's approval to formally bring the TUC as a representative onto that panel. I don't know whether Caroline or Angela have got any other comments to make on the governance paper, but otherwise, if it's okay, just to take any comments before looking at recommendations. Simon
wants to comment, yeah.
Just brief comment, Ben, on the TUC representation. As many colleagues will know, I've been involved in putting together the Yorkshire and Humber Climate Commission with Andy Goulston and others, and we've benefited significantly from TUC input in that respect, particularly with regard to the Just Transition agenda. So in terms of our cross-cutting themes, having TUC representation there, from my perspective, would be a strong positive.
Thank you. And as the paper says, we have TUC representation on the Economic Recovery Board as well, and that has also proven very useful. I'm not seeing any other signals. So are members okay to accept both the recommendations in the paper? I'm seeing thumbs up. Thank you all very much. Those two are passed, and pass back to Roger.
Yeah, thank you, Ben. And I think Mark may come in, Mark Roberts may come in on this connectivity plan. As I said, the objective here was to have some discussion, recognising the time we've all been on this call, obviously focused around how to further the business community engagement in this, as well as the support and hopefully the advocacy in all of the corridors that those businesses walk and talk. And and make sure that it's such a compelling case that those who need to listen and then act accordingly. So I'm going to hand to you, Mark, first.
Thank you, Roger, and I will keep this intro brief, as I am very aware of the timing and the stage of this meeting, and I'll take the paper as read in itself. I guess the paper provides the background to how we're developing our West Yorkshire connectivity infrastructure plan with the objective to make sure that we have our long-term as in sort of 20 years, transport infrastructure and investment programme. And I think it is worth stressing that part of the rationale for why we're talking about this now is to help unlock the government's £4.2 billion infrastructure fund that is linked to the devolution deal. So the paper is quite detailed, sets out the context, but as Roger said, the key piece to focus on really is about engagement and wider business engagement. So if you haven't seen them, I'll put a link in the chat bar. The engagement materials are hosted on the Your Voice pages of the West Yorkshire Combined Authority website. I think they're actually quite good. There's a video animation, there's some key documents in the evidence base, there's some FAQs and a questionnaire. And this stage is open until the 11th of April. And then after this, the Combined Authority is going to respond to that consultation feedback and then start to work to define the scheme details and the costs to get that long list of options down to a shorter list of options, which I think will then come back here. So before I open it up, just to flag as well, there's already quite a few things in the plan. So already the team have undertaken some pre and post launch engagement on this plan with some businesses directly and also through the chamber. We would like to set up a specific session for the business communications BCG members, either in a roundtable format or in one-to-ones, and I think that will be through Joanna to sort of find the right way of bringing that up, and then also a series of more webinar events to get into some of the themes, really focus on some of the main modes of transport, and we would invite business representatives directly to those events, and also the team have offered, if helpful, to set up a more specifically tailored session. So I think that one of the themes throughout this meeting has been, how do we get as much input as possible, especially from people and groups who perhaps aren't already as well connected to our traditional channels. So I think my question on behalf of this paper is what else in terms of engagement? Obviously, if everyone has read the plans and would like to have feedback to give here and now, very welcome offline as well, but really to focus on that engagement point.
Thank you, Mark. Anybody wish to comment now? If you can put that link into the chat, but also perhaps officers, we can make sure we communicate out to the colleagues to make sure we've had a further chance, even if it's offline after the conclusion of this meeting. Anybody want to raise anything now? Thank you, Mark. I've seen you put it in. Anybody want to raise anything now?
I will take that as a very helpful summary, and not just the fact we've all been sat here for 2.5 hours.
Right, okay, thank you for that, Mark. And also, can I, on behalf of the board, thank you for your continued work with the Transport Committee and also at an old level representing us together with others on this call at TFN. Obviously, to note the draft minutes from the last Combined Authority meeting and that our next meeting will be on the 28th of April. I'm not sure whether the 4 stages of getting back to normality, whatever that is, whether that means we're allowed to meet together by then. I'm thinking not, but perhaps we'll clarify. But hopefully the meeting thereafter, which would be our annual meeting, I'm guessing, we would be able to do that in person, but we'll see. Unless there are any other items of business, I'm just checking with Ruth. I don't think we've had any notified.
No, we haven't, Chair.
Can I just thank everybody for your contributions? It's been a long meeting, but we've actually had healthy discussion and debate on some really meaty and challenging topics, and I for one feel that we're as best positioned as we can be to meet those challenges, albeit they won't be solved in an instant. They may not even be solved in a decade, but if we're purposeful, we will actually move closer to solution rather than continuing to identify the ever widening problem in certain aspects. So thank you for that. And unless there's anything further, I'll just pause a moment. I'll call that meeting closed and see you all soon. And I mean, literally, hopefully see you rather than otherwise communicate digitally, as pleasant as it may be. So good night all, stay safe, stay happy.
Bye.
Bye.